night my brother got his promotion, my mother introduced me to his boss with a 2-second pause that said everything she'd spent years not saying out loud. "And this is Juniper," she said, her hand already turning back toward the buffet table. "She teaches elementary school." That pause. That she teaches. Not she's a teacher. Not she's been teaching for 6 years at Ridgecrest. Just the verb, bare and apologetic, like she was confessing something on my behalf. I smiled at my brother's boss and shook his hand and said it was nice to meet him. Because that's what you do. That's what I'd always done. My family's last name carries a certain weight in the kind of circles where weight matters. My grandfather built a regional insurance brokerage from a single office in Columbus, Ohio, with 2 employees and a phone that rang more than it should have. My father turned it into Harland Financial Group. 3 states, 60-something advisors, a glass and steel office on the 15th floor that has his name on the door in brushed nickel letters. My brother Weston, 32, is being groomed to take over. He has the handshake for it, the haircut for it, the ability to talk about liability exposure for 45 minutes without losing the room. And then there's me. When I was 23, finishing my education degree, my father sat across from me at dinner and said with genuine puzzlement, "But what's the ceiling, June?" He wasn't being cruel. That was almost the harder part. He genuinely didn't understand why someone would choose a career where the ceiling was a classroom. My mother's version was softer but arrived at the same destination. She started describing my job to people as working with kids, which technically wasn't wrong and was also, somehow, the most efficient way to make 6 years of professional work disappear. I teach 2nd grade at Ridgecrest Elementary in a suburb of Columbus. I make $48,000 a year. I have 22 students, and this past spring, one of them, a boy named Theo, who hadn't spoken more than 4 words in a row since kindergarten, who'd been flagged by 3 previous teachers as a behavioral concern, read aloud to the class for the first time. 3 full paragraphs from a book about frogs. He looked up at the end, completely shocked by himself. The room was quiet for 1 second, and then his classmates just started clapping, the way kids clap, without any self-consciousness about it. I cried in my car afterward, not sad crying, the other kind. I never told my family about Theo, not because I didn't want to. Because the last time I tried to share something about my classroom, my mother said, "That's sweet, honey," in the tone she uses when she's already thinking about something else. My father once asked, mid-story, if my district offered any administrative track, as if the only logical next step from teaching children was to stop teaching children. The thing about being dismissed by people who love you is that it doesn't arrive as a single event. It's 100 small recalibrations. You stop mentioning the grant you wrote. You stop talking about the curriculum you redesigned. You stop expecting the room to make space for you, and after a while you stop noticing that you stopped expecting it. It just becomes the shape of things. I'd been dating August for 14 months before my brother's promotion party. I met him at a weekend farmer's market in the short north on a Saturday morning when I was buying honey, and he was 2 booths down, talking to a woodworker with the focused attention of someone who actually cares about joinery. He had sawdust on his sleeve. He was wearing a flannel that had seen better decades. I thought when I first saw him that he looked like someone who fixed things for a living. He does in a way. August builds furniture. That's how I understood it at first. Custom pieces, commissioned work, a small workshop on the east side. He drove a pickup with a dented rear panel and always had a tape measure in his back pocket. On our 3rd date, he brought me a small oak cutting board he'd made. Nothing fancy, just clean lines and good wood, and he said he'd noticed I cooked and thought I might use it. I still use it every single day. There were things, though. Small things I filed away without examining too closely. A phone call he took outside a restaurant in a voice that was noticeably different, precise, measured, like someone who runs a meeting. A legal document on his coffee table once, thick with annotations, and a letterhead I glimpsed that said August and Hartwell Design before he set a book on top of it and said it was an old contract. An email on his open laptop that I didn't read but caught the subject line of Nashville Hotel Final Approval Phase 3. I asked him once, casually, if there was more to the business than what he'd described. He thought about it for a moment. Actually thought about it like he was deciding what to say. The work is the same, he said. I design things. I make things. Some of the projects are bigger than others. He said it without any particular emphasis, the way you'd describe taking a different route to work. I let it go, not because I didn't notice, because it didn't change the part I cared about. When I talked, he listened like he'd cleared his whole schedule for it. Weston's promotion party was held at the Harland family house in Dublin, which is the kind of suburb that has neighborhoods with names. My parents had rearranged the living room, brought in a catering service, and set up a cocktail arrangement in the backyard with string lights and a bar cart. About 40 people came, mostly people from my father's world. Brokers, clients, a few partners from Weston's firm. My brother's boss, a man named Richard Colm, who ran the regional office of a national wealth management company, was the highest status guest and the person my parents had been most visibly preparing for. August and I arrived at 6:30. He wore a charcoal blazer over a dark-washed shirt. I wore a green dress I'd bought myself. Not the pale yellow one my mother had bought me without asking and left hanging in my childhood bedroom with a note saying she thought it would look lovely. It did look lovely. I also didn't ask for it, but that's not a fight I had the energy to have. My parents met us near the door. My father looked at August the way he looks at people he's already categorized. A single scan, a nod, the kind of acknowledgement that contains a verdict. Good to finally meet you, he said, which was technically true, and managed to emphasize the word finally in a way that made clear he hadn't been waiting eagerly. You too, August said. He smiled like a man who has never once felt the need to impress someone in a foyer. I had found out about the introductions 2 weeks before. I'd overheard my mother on the phone with my aunt, voice carrying through the kitchen doorway. I'll introduce Weston and his team first, then the Delacroix family, then some of the clients. June and her friend will be there. She can just circulate. A pause. He does woodworking, I think. She seems happy. She seems happy? The way you'd say it about a golden retriever? I stood in the hallway for a while before I walked away. The thing was, it wasn't even malicious. I think that's the part that hurt most. She genuinely thought that was sufficient. June seems happy, moving her around from room to room in the margins of the evening. I'd spent years hoping the dismissal was unconscious. Hearing it stated plainly in my mother's efficient logistics voice made it impossible to keep hoping. I told August that night, in the car driving home from dinner somewhere else. Do you want to skip it? He asked. No, I said. I looked out the window for a moment. I need to go. I think I need to see it clearly one more time, and then I'm done trying to explain myself to them. He didn't say anything reassuring or tell me it would be fine. He just said, okay, I'll be there. At the party, we circulated. I talked to my aunt. I talked to my brother, who was ebullient in the uncomplicated way he gets when he's the center of something. He was glad I was there, genuinely. Weston's relationship with me isn't what my parents' is. He just doesn't push back against it, which is its own kind of failure. But it's a different one. Richard Colm arrived around 7 and immediately became the gravitational center of the room. My father walked him to the house like a tour guide. My mother made sure his drink was never empty. I noticed him the way you noticed the person the room is performing for. He looked at August twice before the speeches. I saw it both times. That particular quality of looking at someone you think you recognize but you're not sure from where. August didn't seem to notice or didn't show it. He was talking to me about something a student of mine had apparently said that I'd mentioned before, a whole anecdote about a kid who'd asked why clouds don't fall down, and he was genuinely thinking about it. My father gave a toast. He stood in the center of the living room with a glass of scotch and did the thing he does, made the room feel like being included was a privilege he was extending. He talked about Weston with the specific, detailed pride of someone who had been paying attention for 30 years. He cited a deal my brother had led. He mentioned the firm by name. He mentioned Richard Colm by name and called him a man of exceptional judgment, and the room appreciated that. He talked about the family's values, diligence, ambition, building something that outlasts you. Then he looked at me with that careful look, the one that's been engineered to seem warm. My daughter Juniper, he said, took a different path. She's in education, working with the little ones. He smiled. The room smiled. And she's brought along a small pause, just enough of one boyfriend who works in trades, which is honest work. He nodded once, like he was bestowing something. They seem very happy. She seems happy. Full circle. I looked at my plate. I heard a few polite sounds around the room. I could feel August go still beside me, not tense, just still. The way still can be a kind of decision. And then Richard Combs said from across the room, "I'm sorry," he set down his glass. "Did you say August?" The room recalibrated. Richard was already moving. Not urgently, but with the directness of a man who doesn't second-guess himself in rooms. He crossed the living room and stopped at the edge of where we were standing. And he looked at August the way someone looks at a person they've been trying to reach for 6 months. "August Muriel," he said. It wasn't a question. August looked at him. "Richard." He said it evenly, like they were running into each other at the hardware store. My father was smiling in the way he smiles when he doesn't know what he's smiling at. "You two know each other?" Richard turned to face my father and he had an expression I recognized from a completely different context. The expression of someone deciding how much to say and choosing more rather than less. "Warren," he said, "do you know who this is?" My father's smile held. "He's June's." "August Merrill," Richard said again, like the name should land. August and Hartwell. They did the interiors for the Callaway Tower renovation in Nashville. And the Meridian Hotel in Denver, the one that won the AIA Interior Design Award in 2023. His studio is probably doing $8-9 million in contracts right now, maybe more. He paused. "I've been trying to get a meeting with him for 4 months. He keeps not having availability." He looked at August with something between exasperation and amusement. "You do custom furniture out of Columbus?" "I do," August said. "The bigger projects come through the studio. The furniture's mine." "He's also," Richard continued, turning back to my father, "the person who funded the Ridgecrest Family Arts Initiative last fall. The one that gave 12 elementary schools in the district new art and music programs." He glanced at me. "I imagine you know that initiative." I went very still. I did know that initiative. We'd received the grant at Ridgecrest in October. It had paid for new music teachers 3 days a week, and an after-school art program that Theo, the boy who'd read aloud, had joined. Theo, who I now knew had started speaking more in that art room than anywhere else. I looked at August. He met my eyes. His expression was entirely infuriatingly calm. "You never asked," he said quietly. My father had set down his glass. Weston was watching from across the room with an expression I'd never seen on him before, like he was trying to catch up to something that had already gone past. August stood up. Not abruptly, he stood the way he does everything, without performing it. "I want to be clear about something," he said. He wasn't raising his voice. In a room that had gone quiet, he didn't need to. "I didn't come here tonight to make a point or to correct anyone. I came because Juniper asked me to and because she matters to me." He looked at my father. "She has been teaching in your community for 6 years. She writes grants, she designs curriculum. She had a student this spring who hadn't spoken more than a few words in a row since kindergarten, and this year, that kid read 3 paragraphs out loud to his class and his classmates gave him a standing ovation." He paused. "She told me that story. Not you. She stopped telling you things because you stopped making room for them." He didn't look away from my father. "You described what I do as trades. That's fine. I work with my hands and I'm proud of that. But you said it the way you meant something else by it, and I think you've been saying things you mean something else by for a long time, and Juniper has been translating them into something more generous than they deserve." The room was not making a sound. I stood up. My legs felt steadier than I expected them to. "I have been editing myself for this family since I was 23 years old," I said. I was looking at my parents. My mother had her hands folded on her lap and her eyes were down. My father was very still in the way that people are still when they've lost the advantage of the room. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just constantly, quietly, making myself smaller to fit the space you left for me. Every time you introduced Weston and then added me like a footnote. Every time you summarized my work in 4 words so the conversation could move on. Every time you described the thing I love as just something I do with children. I looked at my mother. She looked up. I'm not angry, I said. I'm just done. Done performing the version of myself that makes this comfortable for you. I looked at August. Let's go. We left. 40 people watched us walk out. No one said anything. I heard the sound of the room starting up again only after we'd reached the front door. The drive home was quiet for a long time. Not uncomfortable quiet, the kind that comes after something has finally been said and the air is just settling. The Ridgecrest Grant, I said eventually. Yeah. You knew I worked there. I knew you worked there. I looked at him. Why didn't you say anything? He thought about it for a moment, which is what he does when he's being honest rather than just quick. Because I wanted you to know me first, he said, before any of that. He glanced over. Did it work? It had worked. My brother called 2 days later. He sounded like himself minus the performance of himself, which I hadn't heard since we were kids. He said he was sorry. He said he'd known for a long time that things weren't right, and he told himself it wasn't his place to say anything, and that was a coward's logic, and he was sorry. I believed him. Weston's sin was always omission, not commission. That's still a sin, but it's a different kind, and it was the first time he'd ever named it himself. My mother called 3 days after that. She asked if she could take me to lunch. We sat across from each other at a restaurant she'd chosen, somewhere nice, and she ordered coffee and spent a few minutes arranging her silverware before she looked at me. I don't think I ever understood what you did as being serious, she said. I think I thought of it as something you were doing until you found something else. And then the years went by and I just kept thinking that because it was easier than changing what I thought. She stopped. I'm not saying that to excuse it. I'm saying it because you deserve to know that I knew something was wrong before tonight and I chose not to look at it directly. That honesty cost her something visible. I could see it in the way she held her coffee cup. I told her what I needed. Not therapy as a punishment, not a grand gesture. Something specific and real. I wanted her to come to my classroom. Not for a show. Not when there was something impressive scheduled. Just to come, on an ordinary Tuesday, and see what the work actually looked like. To sit in the back and watch me teach 22 second graders for an hour and then tell me what she thought. She said yes before I finished the sentence. She came on a Thursday in April. She sat in one of the small chairs along the back wall with her knees at an awkward angle because the chairs are built for 7-year-olds, and she stayed for an hour and 40 minutes. She watched me redirect a meltdown without the class losing its rhythm. She watched the reading circle. She watched Theo. She didn't know it was Theo. I hadn't told her the name. She watched him raise his hand and answer a question in a full sentence, and she watched me respond to him exactly the way I'd respond to any other student, like what he said mattered, like it was worth taking seriously. Afterward, in the parking lot, she said, "You're very good at this." She said it the way my father had said similar things about Weston, once, at a dinner I'd barely been paying attention to. Specific. Present. Like she had actually been watching. I cried in my car again, the same kind of crying as after Theo read his paragraphs. I don't know what happens next with my family. I've stopped needing to know. What I know is that something I spent years trying to make legible to people who'd already decided what it was worth. Something finally got seen clearly, and it wasn't because I got louder or smarter or more impressive. It was because someone who had no stake in the verdict looked at it and said, without flinching, "This is real, and it matters, and the people who told you otherwise were wrong." August is at the workshop most mornings before I'm up. He makes coffee and leaves a cup on the counter for me, always slightly too strong because that's how he likes it, and I drink it anyway because by now, it's the way I like it too. Some mornings, I grate papers at his kitchen table while he sketches. Neither of us says much. The quiet between us has the particular quality of quiet that comes from not needing to perform for each other, not even a little. There's something I keep coming back to about all of it. I spent 6 years trying to make my work legible to my family by making it sound like something they recognized. More credential, more outcome, more measurable. I kept trying to translate what I did into a language that fit their scale. And the whole time, the thing I was doing, the actual thing, was sitting in a classroom with a kid who couldn't speak above a whisper and finding the precise angle at which he felt safe enough to try. You can't put that in a title, you can't put it on a wall in brushed nickel letters. But it happened. It kept happening, every year in ways I would never be able to fully explain to someone who had already decided what the ceiling was. I'm done trying to explain it to those people. I'll keep doing it for the ones who are willing to just sit in the back and watch. I thought a lot about that Thursday morning my mother spent sitting in the back of my classroom with her knees bent at an awkward angle in a chair built for a 7-year-old. She didn't have to come, she chose to. And I think that choice, small and quiet and slightly uncomfortable, was the most honest thing she'd offered me in years. What happened at my brother's party wasn't really about August. I mean, it was the reveal, the moment Richard said his name and the room recalibrated, but that was just the thing that cracked the surface. What was underneath had been building for 6 years of being introduced as a footnote. 6 years of she teaches said in that particular tone, the one that treats a vocation like a holding pattern. Here's what I keep coming back to. My parents weren't bad people. That's the part that took me the longest to sit with. They loved me. They just loved me with a framework that had no room for what I actually was. And I kept trying to fit myself into that framework instead of standing outside it and saying clearly, this is what I do, this is what it means, and your inability to measure it doesn't make it small. That's the thing about integrity. Not the word on a motivational poster, but the real version. The one where you keep showing up for the work even when no one in your family is watching. Every year I went back to that classroom and wrote the grants and redesigned the curriculum and sat with kids like Theo, not because my father was going to put me on a wall, but because the work was real and it mattered, and I knew it mattered even when I couldn't prove it to anyone at a cocktail party. That's what I mean by integrity. It's the choice you make in the room where no one important is looking. And then there's the harder thing, the part that required me to actually think clearly instead of just absorbing the hurt quietly. I had to understand what was happening. I had to look at the seating arrangements and the introductions and the 2-second pauses and see them accurately, not charitably. For a long time, I translated everything into something more generous than it was. That was its own kind of failure. Not stupidity, just the thing you do when you love people and want to believe the best. But clarity is a form of respect, including self-respect. You can't change a dynamic you won't look at directly. And then August. The persistence of him, the way he just kept showing up in his flannel with sawdust on his sleeve and asking what I loved about my work, not what it paid. He modeled something I hadn't fully understood yet, that the right people don't need you to translate yourself into their language. They learn yours. I'm still not entirely sure what the next year with my family looks like. My mother came to my classroom. My brother called and named what he'd done wrong. That's not nothing. That's actually a lot. But I've stopped measuring the relationship against what I wish it had always been. I'm measuring it against what it actually is right now. This week, this conversation. The work is still the same. 22 kids. One of them raises his hand more than he used to. Most mornings I drink coffee that's slightly too strong and I don't mind anymore. That's enough to keep going.